Russ Hadlock, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. I'm glad to be here.
Russ, you bought an autoglass repair business in November 2022. Things were precarious for the first year, but then a few months ago, in the fall of 2023, things took a turn for the worse and really reached crisis level. So you are in the throes of a small business struggle as we speak. We're going to hear that story and how you're thinking about the future and dealing with this. But let's get started with some background on you, please, Russ.
So I spent the bulk of my career selling in one way or another, from, selling tools on commission in high school, all the way through, B2B career sales later in life. And then in 2019, I stumbled across an idea, a product idea, if you will. It was the proverbial lightning bolt moment. Developed a product and it started to garner some traction, and that product turned into a company. So I left everything I had built and went all in on the product, built a company.
Russ, before we hear that mini story, which I want to give a minute to, give us just a little bit more background on you and your experience with business, because I recall you telling me you weren't always destined to become an entrepreneur. That happened maybe a little bit later in your professional maturation. So give me more on that.
I would say I was I guess a product of my upbringing. So, my dad was retired military and blue collar, and that's what I thought I was, going to be. I didn't go the military route, but I thought that I would get a job and I would grind it out my entire life, working for the man. The concept of business ownership never really occurred to me. And then later in my career, I got an opportunity to become a partner in a company, which gave me some exposure. And then my wife's father was a successful entrepreneur. And I think that those two things sort of changed, broke the frame I was living in and kind of gave me a different mindset and perspective. And then I slowly shifted, over the course of, 8-9 years, out of the W-2 mindset. And I don't know that I can go back successfully now if I had to.
It is a bit of a rabbit hole or a red pill, I should say. Russ, and so you said 8 or 9 years ago, so call it 2013, 14, 15 is when this awakening is occurring?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Okay. And that awakening is because of this exposure you get to kind of the inner workings of a business at having been promoted to partner at a business that you were an employee of. And then presumably you hit the books, you listen to the pods, you just start educating yourself over the next few years on all things business and entrepreneurship. Yeah,
for sure. I think that there's I think if all of your guests, me included, probably have a sub level of personality, which is somewhat obsessive. And not everybody has that, but, I'll drink Diet Coke relentlessly for 6 months, and then I'll bounce and I'll be on a water kick and a different diet, and I'll obsess over that. And that type of personality trait, also, can take people the other way. That's where addiction comes from and things like that. Mm-hmm. I recognize that about me, but, I think that that's part of what, that's an undertone in the entrepreneurial spirit. And so, mm-hmm. When I got exposed to business, really deep, really far, and it just sort of hooked. And that's how I ended up here. Podcasts and books. And, we all know the buy then build, of course, that gets mentioned many, many times on here. All of those things, I couldn't consume it fast enough. I still do, even now.
Mm-hmm. And now let's return to this, light bulb moment of a product concept that you had. Were you still employed as partner of that previous business, and in what industry was that?
It was packaging, so it's agricultural packaging. Okay. Yeah, I would say that company, that business, everything about that place was great. I probably, in hindsight, should have stayed there. I just, because of the things that we just mentioned, I can't. I need to be my mind needs to be consumed. And there was enough extra time in that job that allowed me to pursue other creative opportunities. And I've always been creative to some extent. I've had a wood shop, and I love metalworking and all of those things. And yeah, so I was this product was all built on Peloton. So in one of my obsessive moments, I bought a Peloton bike in 2017 with a quest to lose weight, and I was riding 45 minutes a day every day because I was in that obsessive moment. And then I got to a point where I had lost the weight, and I was starting to ride to just maintain, and I was starting to get bored, and I wanted to keep myself engaged. So I was looking for some other hook, like some other dopamine hit while I was on the bike. And so I started to play video games and other things. And I was like, I can't be the only one that's trying to ride and get other things accomplished. Well, for whatever reason, I was looking at the bike, and I saw I don't want to say vision because that sounds cheesy, but I saw the vision of a tray on the handlebars. And I was like, if I could put my laptop on there, I could ride and then answer emails and do other things. I was kind of dabbling in Amazon arbitrage. So I was learning Amazon Seller Central and all of those things. And so I thought, if I could ride while I'm doing that or studying, PPC or whatever, I could kill two birds with that one stone. And so, I saw, some people might remember, but there's this plastic tray that goes on the steering wheel in a car for the traveling salesman, and the as seen on TV ad or the pictures that float around is the guy's eating his hamburger in his car, and this tray is sort of pinched on the steering wheel. Why that tray design, I felt like a similar iteration of that would work on the handlebars of the bike. And so, I created one in the wood shop and tested it, and I was like, wow, this might actually work. And so then, to condense a very long story, that I parlayed that into a successful product, and then later a company. I found a partner, we engineered a bunch of parts, and built a successful e-commerce company, and bought our own machines and in-house and manufacturing, and we did a lot in a couple of years, and that some of that thanks to COVID and the Peloton rise, but.
And Russ, at what point did you have the confidence to go all in on that business and quit your W-2?
That's a trick question, in the sense that I probably would have done. I'm a little reckless in that sense. I feel like I came from nothing, so I'm not afraid of nothing. But I have a spouse that is in my ear, and I think we all understand that. Like every entrepreneur, there's usually a good woman behind him somewhere. And or vice versa, a good man behind a good woman. But so I think it was getting over the hurdle of convincing my wife, like, I have an opportunity here to go all in on this. And I didn't want to be on my deathbed and look back and say, you know what, I played it safe, and I wondered what could have been, And so we finally got to a position where, she agreed and I agreed that it was time to go all in. We were both up late at night packing, until, you put the kids into bed at 7, and then we're packing orders and labels and everything until 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And we were like, it was time. It was a pivotal moment. We either, we had to do something. And so that was the moment. So.
Fantastic. And so we're not gonna spend much more time on this story, but give us the bullet points. How big did this business become? Obviously, Peloton is the kind of picture of a company that benefited from COVID, and this is in the COVID timeframe, and you were kind of on the coattails of the Peloton platform. Yeah, I mean that's you're basically building a product on a platform, in this case Peloton. So give us the high level of basically what happens, and to put some numbers around it, if you would.
Yeah. So the product was at 0 in July of 19. And I would say by the end of the year, it was that one single product was generating, close to $100,000 a month, so it was trending $1 million a year in gross revenue. And that Q4 of that year, at that same time, I was out looking for an engineering partner because I knew that there were other, product opportunities within the space that were beyond my capabilities. So I would say by the end of 2019, I had found a partner, and by early 2020, we were kind of like in motion. Like we were starting to produce some product, some ideas, starting to put them out there. I had developed a bit of an audience, so I could quickly deploy an idea. And then by the time COVID had hit, we had, I think 2 other products kind of ready to go. They were launched and just starting to get some traction. And then the work from home orders started to land. And then we just boomed after that. So from the first 18 months of COVID, so after the work from home orders started, we did $4 million in revenue. So we just absolutely exploded.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a ride.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So 4 million over the first 18 months of COVID. So annualized, that's what, 2.6 million from an absolute standstill the year before.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what?
And then the Amazon aggregators started to reach out. Like, we had garnered some attention, and we had my partner and I had no intent to sell. Like, we knew that it may not have been evergreen within Peloton, but we thought that we would parlay the manufacturing. Like, we had purchased all of our own equipment and a building and everything. We had in-housed everything, and we thought that we could parlay that into additional manufacturing opportunities. So we would go, aerospace or whatever. That's where his background was from, and I could sell. And so that's the idea, was to build a company into that. And then the aggregator started to call, and we got a lot of interest in the acquisition. And we thought, wow, this was an opportunity we didn't even think about. And the multiples were so good, it seemed like a no-brainer. So we then latched onto another company that was going to help us build the books and everything to prepare for sale. Here's what the aggregators look for. Here's what your books need to look like. We had to separate the brand from the manufacturing. The aggregators didn't want the machines and the employees. And so we started to segregate the company in such a way that those things looked optimal for the aggregator. And then I would say at the halfway through 22, so my wife is a teacher, and we were nearing the end of the school year. So I'd say April, May of 22, I started to communicate with that company that was helping us. I was like, listen, I'll make you a discount if to sell you my half to give us the opportunity to move. So my wife wanted to move across the state and, get closer to the water and whatever. And so I extended an offer to that company, and they ended up seizing it. And so they purchased me out, and they became, the stand-in for my partner. My engineering partner is still behind doing his thing. And so I took that funding, we moved, and then the search began.
You moved from Eastern Washington to the Seattle side.
Correct. Yep. I'm on the other side of the Puget Sound from Seattle, but yep. That's correct.
Great. And was that exit a life-changing moment for you financially?
It was. I had dreamed of, developing a $1 million product when I was a kid. Like, I always thought the $1 million idea was the end-all be-all. I didn't have the entrepreneurial concept. I didn't think about building $1 million company, but I thought if I could create a widget, make $1 million off of it, I wouldn't have to work anymore.
Maybe when you were a kid, $1 million would have done the trick.
Yeah. When I was 10, that seemed like a really big deal. So I all told, that product generated $1 million. Obviously, that didn't end up in my pocket. The acquisition was, high 6 digits. I didn't break that threshold, but it was enough for me to, it was a life-changing amount. And I felt like it was enough for me to help me create the next step, the next layer, and I wanted some stability. I've heard many times that selling on Amazon is like picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. Like, you're sort of at their mercy. I had a lot of frustration with China and the Amazon way of doing things. And I thought, you know what, I wanted to go safe and stable. And, like we discussed in our pre-call, I looked at everything, from accounting practices and HVAC to landscaping. And I thought, I wanted to be safe, something that I could do. And that's the precipice.
And where did you learn about this concept of search between your success with the Peloton add-on product, tray product, and search? Like, how did you know that going out and buying an existing business? Because a lot of people, even people who've been in entrepreneurship for a long time, don't see that path.
I didn't. I didn't think. I thought that everybody sold to bigger firms, PE firms, or like the aggregators. Those were the guys I was talking to, right? Like these institutions that went out and gathered capital and consumed a bunch of companies. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to flatter you or sell the podcast, but
Please,
a lot of it has
me.
to do with acquiring minds. Like I'd listened to a ton of stories. I don't know the exact day or the exact story that flipped that switch, but that's where that data came from. That's where that idea came from. So in my obsession into business, I had stumbled across acquiring minds amongst the half a dozen other podcasts, and the stories that I had heard from people with nothing doing a business acquisition. I'm still a huge advocate, even in I'm struggling now, but I still think that from a standstill, there's no better way to create wealth. There's hands down no better way, and I'm convinced of that wholeheartedly. And so, that's how I'm listening to your stories. That's what got me into this mess.
I don't know whether to be gratified or horrified here, Russ.
Yeah.
One more just follow up on that. Yes, you did. You said you wanted something safe, sure, or safer than certainly building on the Amazon platform, which is so unpredictable, as you just said. But still, you were somebody who had started something from scratch and created a wildly successful product. And so that might otherwise give an entrepreneur the confidence to go and do that same path again, seeking out a different widget, a different product. Yeah. So were you not at all tempted by another 0 to 1 adventure?
Yes and no. There's two thoughts behind why I didn't do that. The first one is I didn't get enough money, I think, that gave me enough runway for me to really go out and try and fail a couple of times. And then two, I really felt like it was lightning in a bottle. That's probably an internal frame that I need to let go. I feel like in all likelihood to come up with a product, and then catching COVID at the right time, all of those circumstances to me felt so random. That I don't really want to take 100% credit for the fact that happened, and then so in the back of my mind, I think, if I go through the work to come up with an idea and try to launch it and build it, I'm going to be legged down because there was so much fire behind the other one that it's going to be hard to compete with that. And so I thought, I'm going to be better off trying to find something that's already got some momentum and try to inject what I do into that space.
Okay. So let's pick up at your search then. So you all have moved westward, across the state to the west, cross Puget Sound from Seattle. What is that area called on the other side of the Sound from Seattle? Does that have a name, that kind of peninsula?
Yeah, the Olympic Peninsula is kind of what it's referred to. It's
great.
The Olympic Mountains are right in the middle of the peninsula, and there's small communities wrapped all the way around. So,
okay. So tell us, you started talking about some of the kind of traditional businesses that we hear about a lot, landscaping, HVAC. Take us into your search.
So I'd listened to, many of the other searchers and the criteria, that they work from, right? So geography, I kind of threw out the window. I wasn't going to move again. My wife wasn't going to let us move again. So I knew I was geographically limited. And numbers wise, so for whatever reason, I was under the impression that I was limited in my acquisition power by home equity, like how much I could back end the loan with. In hindsight, that was I don't know where I got that idea. Because if you run that idea out, it doesn't make any sense at all. But I just felt like I was limited in what I could buy by the amount of equity I had to back up the loan.
But
So
Russ, let's dwell on this for a minute, just in case listeners in the audience are making the same mistake. But you just recently bought the house, so you must not have had. Did you just do a 20% mortgage? Typical, like you must not have had that much equity in the house anyway.
Well, so we had sold our home, and then I had, money from the sale, and I put a bunch of stuff in it. So I knew that that was my biggest, my biggest asset, right, was the home. So I had a fair amount of equity, which I felt like was allowing me to buy, up the chain a little bit. And I felt like too, I was also, and maybe some of it was subconscious in the fact that I felt like if it all went down, I could sell the house and clear the loan. Like I could still have a business that was cash flowing with no loan if I absolutely had to. We'd be homeless, but I would have a business that could at least wipe the loan clean. But anyway, that I don't know why I had that like mindset, but that's part of what I had forced myself into a business that sort of fit in that mold. And then I was a little bit, spooked, I think, by some of the bigger ones. Like I've done a ton of creative deals, from buildings and homes to, the business stuff I'm not afraid to be really, really creative in deal making. And so I felt like if I needed to buy bigger, I could have made the deal happen, but the fear started to kind of come in over the top of me. Like I didn't want to buy a business that was bigger than what I felt like I was capable of running.
And so the theory that the bigger you buy, in fact, the less risky it is, intellectually you could understand that, but like emotionally you weren't there, which I understand.
Yeah. In hindsight, that was probably, a very, very big mistake. Like I just didn't peel all the layers of the onion back and really think about it. And I think, some of that too is that I was alone in the search. I think some of the search fund groups, there's a huge advantage in that there's a lot of, I mean, from the outside looking in, there's a lot of dialogue that happens back and forth. And and everybody talks about being alone on a search, and you kind of are, because the criteria is different. Even if I found somebody else that was searching, they're going to be all of the variables are going to be different for that searcher than they are for me. So even if we could have some dialogue, I don't know that I would have uncovered some of my hangups because, we're both going through, the end result is the same, but everything else is different.
Yeah.
The dollars that you're willing to spend, how the SBA, brokerage is dealing with you, previous experience, the business that you're looking at, none of those things are going to be the same. The bank motions of the bank are probably similar, but that's the only part.
Yeah. Well, this point about now in retrospect, you wished you had pushed through whatever anxiety you had about buying a larger business. I just want to make sure that I heard that correctly, because if there are other, I understand your feeling too. Like, I think it's natural for most people that like the smaller it is, the less risky it is. And even when you hear, no, $1 million SDE business is going to be more stable and therefore less risky, it's still very hard to feel that as opposed to just intellectually understand it. So I just want to highlight you now into a year and 4 months into this, looking back on that, and just now you really do feel the truth of that, the truth that bigger is better.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I felt like that I had carved up the SDE in my projections in such a way that I had a little bit of breathing room. I felt like it was big enough, but it can go. That SDE can get consumed so fast. Like a third. So a third of debt, a third extra, or owner salary, and a third for slop is kind of what I had calculated for
slop, for reinvesting or whatever. For margin, correct. Reinvesting, anything, hiring.
Yeah. I knew that I wasn't going to run the company nearly as well as the old owner, right? Like he'd grown up in it and ran it for 25 years. I knew operationally he was really had it dialed in, right? I knew I'm gonna like my cost of goods are going to go up 2% or 3% because I'm not buying as sharp. I'm going to make some mistakes, and I kind of accounted for a lot of that. I'm going to have to hire people to back end him, and so I tried to put all those numbers in the equation, but it probably should have been, I'd have to look at it from a real number. It's too important to just bucket it into a percent. Like I needed to look at real numbers and say, okay, will this number XYZ pay for, an employee 2% cost of good increase? There were some expenses that increased that I didn't account for that sort of eroded, my guesstimates. That was probably the biggest miss, as I just didn't know some stuff was going to go up and I didn't know it.
Well, let's put a pin in that because we're going to get into the nitty gritty there. But at this point, is it fair to say that you kind of napkin mathed the search? It was kind of like like you said, divided the SDE that you would have into thirds, and kind of that was what the kind of assumption you were operating under.
Right. So I knew, size wise, like I had looked at some, a couple of businesses that were smaller, and I looked at a couple of businesses that were a little bit bigger. And then you start to, do the equation. Here's the debt load, and I started from the debt load. And I was like, here are all the pieces. And,
Russ, let's actually do this math with the business you bought. So let's kind of quickly go through. You looked at a few businesses that you didn't. Tell us, is there anything to say about the businesses you didn't buy?
I would say one, like I was really close. I sent an LOI and I was preparing to make an offer on a landscaping company in Seattle. And it was smaller. It was probably, 60% of what this one is. So this, to give the audience some clarity, this business does 2.3 to 2.5 million a year in gross revenue. The landscaping company, I think, was like, 1.5 or something like that, 1.7. And the problem with the landscaping one is I realized when you look at the map, you're like, oh, it's just a ferry ride, across to Seattle. But the ferry system is kind of a nightmare to deal with. The people in our part of the world understand that. But I felt like if there was an emergency, because it was on the other side of the water, if there was an emergency, I couldn't address it fast enough.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to commute back and forth on a ferry every day. So that business wasn't going to work out. So that's, one that I walked away from. And it was smaller yet. I mean, that was probably a really good move. It had those two. It wasn't big enough, and I had a geography problem.
So at this point, even though you're technically in the greater Seattle metropolitan area, and there are probably a lot of people in your neighborhood who commute daily over to Seattle to go to work, you really don't even feel, you've learned that at this point, your search is going to have to be geographically limited to the peninsula, the Olympic Peninsula, not even greater Seattle. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it was the right business in the Seattle area, I probably could have, I thought about, more e-commerce, maybe that in hindsight, maybe that would have been a good idea, but I felt like it was risky. I was trying to stay safe. I wanted a services business. But I could have done e-commerce or whatever that gives me some remote capability from the other side. And I looked at that, like I dug around, I went through Empire Flippers and, some of the e-com sites looking. I just didn't find one that grabbed me. I knew that I was afraid of what was going to happen with the economy. And I really wanted stability. I have a blue collar kind of, inner core and, sweat equity. And I think the humans that make up the blue collar space I can relate to. So some of that was my draw to go the direction I did.
Great.
And the business, to go back to your numbers question. So of the 2.5 million in revenue, it spits off about 600K in SDE. Multiple.
Well, tell us about the business, and then we're going to get into the numbers. What did you? How did you find it? What is it?
So a friend of mine sent me the listing. This one was on BizQuest only. It was the only place it was listed. And if it had said, when I was scrolling through the list, if it said automotive in it, I didn't even open it. I had no interest in automotive, none. I'm not much of a car guy per se, and there was just nothing about the automotive space that interested me. But when he sent me the listing and I looked at it, I'll tell you the criteria that got my attention is that there's more than one location and there's more than one discipline. So this particular company, the Autoglass Clinic and Mobile Radio, has a 12-volt component, so auto accessories from, car stereos and lighting to vehicle outfitting and stuff, to all the way to autoglass. And so when I was looking at it, again, I'm looking at it from a safe perspective. I'm like, okay, so you've got when the economy's hopping and people are putting money in their cars, I've got the 12-volt side that will breathe with that side of the economy, right? And then I have the autoglass side that is safe and stable. And, again, a recession doesn't really care about, like, if your windshield's broken, you got to get it fixed.
Yep.
And there's also a huge insurance component, which you and I have talked about. We'll come back to that, but there's an insurance component to that too. So I'm looking at all of the things that can kill this business. And I'm like, man, this looks really, really solid. And there's 2 locations. So location 1 and location 2 are about 40 minutes apart geographically. So there's 2 population densities, 2, income. I would say the core income that the company attacks varies greatly between those 2 locations. So again, more stability. I'm like, okay, I'm diversifying my income. I'm diversifying my geography. I'm diversifying the discipline. All of those things were attractive to me.
And in the 25-year you mentioned 25 years that the previous owner had been in it for that long. Was he the founder
yes.
also?
No, his dad was the founder. So it started as Mobile Radio in 1982, I think, in a garage.
Mm-hmm. So that's and then very attractive. I mean, it had weathered any number of storms.
Correct. Yeah, very, very well run, well built. The company has changed. Like I could probably do a whole hour on how this little tiny company had evolved, under the 2 different owners and how drastically different they've been run. The original owner, the founder, had I think half a dozen or 8 locations at one point. And then when the next generation took it over, completely redesigned the company, brought it back to two companies, changed the operational. It's just further proof at how eclectic the business space is, right? Like it can be done. You can make money a million ways. There's no right way. There's no black and white to it. You can be successful in the way that you run a business in a multitude of ways. So that's how part of the reason that made this company so appealing to me. And then I met I shopped him. My wife needed a new windshield, and so I scheduled here. And I brought the car in. He didn't know at the time who I was. Like I was communicating with a broker. I had signed the NDA, gotten some documents. He didn't know who I was, but I came in and shopped it. And so I got a chance to see the owner in action and kind of see the company in action and feel the atmosphere and the culture. And then I, had my windows tinted at the other location. So I shopped both locations, to kind of get a feel on both, doing my own personal due diligence.
Yeah, and you liked it. What did you find when you shopped it?
It felt really, really solid. It felt like a company that had been around for a long time. It was the culture felt good. The interaction, you don't get to interact with everybody, but I got to interact with enough of the people where I could sort of there was no underlying sensation of discomfort or nobody was uneasy or there were just no red flags popping out of the internal culture that I could perceive anyway. Mm-hmm. So I kind of felt like this is the one, and then I got a chance I went a little bit further and then scheduled a meeting with the owner. So the broker at that point, once the owner and I started to communicate, the broker stepped back and then he was just waiting for the deal to close, which from a broker standpoint, that I feel like he failed the situation to some extent, but it's fine. And so the owner and I got, we went and had a beer and got to spend some time together, and I got to know him and he got to know me. And I think it was at that point that we bonded and realized that we clicked. We were very complementary. I think if he and I could build a business together, it would be great. Much like my previous partner, I think there's two types of entrepreneurs. Obviously there's tons of shades, but most people can be carved up into two buckets. You either lead sales and marketing, or you lean, operation aptitude, right? And those two things make a really good partnership. And my previous partner was very much operationally, oriented, right? And I knew that I'm sales and marketing, big idea, quick to act, I get all of these things that I think are both a blessing and a curse for what I do. And so I was like, okay, if this company needed an operational rebuild, I'm not the guy. Like I just don't have that capacity. I can hire for it and I can see it, but I just don't have the ability to fix that. And so I knew that he was that the bones of the company were good, right? And that where he was lacking, I was strong. So I thought I could come in and then start to grow that top end. Like, let me inject my skill set. If I could just keep the wheels on operationally, inject my skill set, and then grow that top line. So that was the idea.
And so, Russ, one more time on the numbers. It was 2.3 to 2.5 in top line revenue. And what was the take home? What was the SDE?
Just shy of 6.
Just shy of 6. So this isn't super small. It's maybe it's not $1 million of SDE that, are 750 to $1 million, but it's also not crazy small, actually.
Right. Well, yeah, which is what I thought. I thought that, this is big enough to handle the debt load, throw 100 or 150 out for.
Take us through that math. Take us exactly that math now that we know what the SDE is. Call the SDE 550 to 600.
Yeah. So I knew that. So the debt load was going to be a couple $100,000 a year to kind of no matter what, so that left me with somewhere between 400 and 500 to then, carve up into me or additional employees or company growth or a combination of all of those things. And so I knew that I didn't intend to take any money out of the company for the first year and a half to 2 years. So I thought, okay, that's 500, the 400 to 500 that's left in the bucket, 300 to 400 after debt service that is left to hire for employees. So I knew there was going to be a gap for the exit of the owner. And then there's going to be some growth initiatives. There's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to do. A ton of money I was going to dump in early on to upgrade, all of the marketing, the whole marketing side of it, like website rebuild, signage, branding, all of that stuff. And so I figured I could touch half of that. So 150 to 200, and the other 150 to 200 needs to stay in the system, right? For operational, cash flow.
And so when you say you weren't going to take any money out, you mean you weren't even going to pay yourself a salary.
Right. Yep.
So you were going to work your plan was to work for free for whatever, first couple of years.
Right. Yeah. That was the intent. Is I could. I mean, I felt like if it was generating enough money, then you take a quarterly dividend, or if you're starting to see regular cash flow, then I could throw myself in payroll. But I was prepared to not pay myself. And I had put a smaller down. We did the typical 10 and 10 breakup. So the owner carried 10. I put 10% down in the acquisition, and I intentionally did not put a larger down payment down so I could hoard some cash for my own survival. And so, that was the intent. Like if I didn't need it, great. If I did need it, I had a cushion. Like if the company wasn't generating enough, I had my own cash to keep me going. So that was the plan, like, which I felt like I had it all mapped out really well, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're being actually quite conservative. And so you said 10% seller note, 10% equity, 80% SBA loan. Great. And fully anticipating to invest, fully anticipating a J curve, and prepared to not take any money for yourself if the business needed that. And keeping your own powder dry in the form of putting in less equity, 10%, so that if you needed to have cash on hand to infuse in the business or what have you, it was there too. So you really are trying to foresee choppy waters and be able to navigate them. Okay. All right. So So we've got the transaction. You are, before you just finished saying that you're the sales marketing guy or type, and the previous owner is more operational. He's not going to stay in the business. So you perceive this gap. What are you going to do to fill it?
So he actually did stay for about 6 months on payroll to try to train me. Like the relationship that he and I had, like I said, was very, very good. We developed very much a friendship, and I knew he would be there. I would say he was. I agreed to pay him, like his request to stay, the salary or the hourly rate was really high, but to me that seemed like tuition. Like to keep his knowledge, to keep that 25-year knowledge of the business in the system while I try to learn, from the fire hose, seemed like money well spent. So again, to go back to your previous point, like I had a bunch of, powder left to deploy. That was almost a hindrance in a sense. Like every time something came up, I'm like, I prepared for this. I got it. I'll take care of it. And so I think that gave me a false sense of security, which, later haunts me, but we'll address that later. But to go back to him, so he stayed at a higher rate. We also backfilled an employee that was supposed to be as capable as he was. That was a huge miss. The salary, I wasn't a part of the hiring in that. Again, I'm not faulting him because everything in the rearview mirror always looks better. It's at the moment. I think we all thought it was the right maneuver, but the guy wasn't capable of doing what he did, and he was provided a salary that threw the numbers off. And this was all at the 11th hour. So we closed in November. That employee was hired in September. So this
employee was basically another kind of operations person with a lot of industry knowledge and experience, who you saw as the person who was going to replace the owner after the owner's 6 months came and went, sort of thing.
Correct. Yep. He would get hired and that was part of my contingency too in the acquisition. As I told the owner, I can't sit behind the desk and do everything that you do every day. There's enough. I felt like there was enough, STE to hire a good guy to put in that seat and do that job. And so that was part of my criteria, and I accounted for that in that STE. I had a certain salary in mind. He was hired at 50% more than I thought. So that's one of the drops in the bucket that started to eat away at that STE that was unexpected. Mm-hmm. And again, this was happening between September and the close date of November. That was one of the things that changed that. And because I didn't get a chance to interview, I didn't have any say in the salary. He was doing the seller was doing what he felt like he needed to do to get the deal across the finish line. And in reality, it was throwing a stone in my backpack, that would haunt me later. And I don't know, like I could have done a bunch of different things, in hindsight to I think blunt that. And I just didn't speak up enough because of deal fatigue. Like we had started the process in June, and I think deal fatigue was a big problem for me. Because I'm inherently a sales guy. I wanted to close the sale at that point. Like in June, I started it. I'm like, I'm looking for an investment. I'm looking for my future and all those things. And then by November, after months and months of due diligence and back and forth and working on all these things, I just wanted to get over the finish line.
Yeah.
And really, I should have walked away. There were probably three things, in that last 60 days that should have made me walk away. But I didn't want to walk away with, 5 months worth of work, and just throw it away. But you need to be willing to do that. That's a huge lesson. Anybody that's searching.
We call that sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Really hard to walk away from a sunk cost in anything in life. Mm-hmm. But the disciplined business person pushes through that. But I hear you, Russ. Don't get me wrong. What were these three things that now are obvious red flags in retrospect?
So that was one. To hire for the owner, the cost to replace him was much higher than was anticipated. I mean, the right guy is probably still out there somewhere, is plausible. But it just at the moment, that wasn't the right guy for that spot. So that's one. Because we did an asset sale versus a stock sale, the leases had to be rewritten, and the lease in the primary location doubled. the landlord, was able to take advantage of that. Like he kind of knew that the whole deal hinged on these leases, and the bank wants a 10-year promise. The bank wants to see a 10-year lease. Well, so he took advantage of that and doubled it. So there's two things now that basically those two things alone almost amount to 30% of my equation. And so, and then I think the complexity of the job, I think right at the tail end, I got to see how complex the business is. And I think I knew at that moment, it wasn't as easy to backfill for that complexity than I thought it might have been.
And by complexity, you mean the technical know-how that's required of your team? Or do you
correct.
mean, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And the business as a whole, so from everything, I did retail for years, and then I went into B2B sales, commercial sales. And then I pretty much was in B2B space, continuously after that. And then I went into manufacturing e-commerce. Well, all of those, the transaction pace is very patterned. It's 30-day terms, and most of the buys are happening in bulk on rhythm. This business, the daily transaction volume, I probably do more transactions in a day than I saw in 2 weeks in the e-com business, because Amazon takes all of that. Like what you're seeing as an Amazon seller on the back end is you get paid every 2 weeks, and you're uploading, you're sending in your inventory on this timed rhythm. In my B2B sales, it was the same thing. It might have been daily transactions, but the volume just isn't there. Mm-hmm. I've got to buy a part from O'Reilly's, and I got to buy a part from Honda, and then I got to bill that to the insurance company. Then I got to turn around and return this part that was bad part. Like that, the velocity of all that creates a ton of complexity in cash flow. And I got just a little glimpse of that in the waning hours prior to closing, and it spooked me in that the operational demand was going to be, extreme.
And interesting. And so this is really about the complexity of a high volume transaction business versus what you've been used to, where even though the volume might have been high volume, you weren't having kind of direct contact with that high volume. You were
Correct.
thinking in weekly terms, bi-weekly terms.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the ways that you'd characterize this business, or your perception of this business, Russ, to me on the pre-call, was dumb and safe, which is, and you meant that affectionately, you meant that positively. And I guess the dumb piece meant like, we're doing windshields, we're doing car radios, like it should be pretty straightforward. Is that what you meant by dumb? And is that now what you subsequently found out was not as dumb as it looked?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. I would say I try to keep this thought out of my mind because it can take me down with it. But there are so many ways to make money that are easier than this. Like we, as a collective team, and hats off to the guys in this, both in the industry and within my team, because the amount of work and effort it takes to spit a dollar out is insane to me.
Say more.
The sweat equity that goes into like removing a windshield is not easy. There's a ton of parts to it. The customer doesn't give a crap really who you are. So to create a positive customer experience is difficult. And you could work really hard and put a team, in there for, like I said, maybe $100. Well, by the time you put all the other operational costs on top of that, like it's just you got to do a ton of them. Like everybody's got to sweat really, really hard to get that income. And I would say this isn't the only service business that's like that. I've studied enough to know that there are other places like that too. But at some point, like volume and scale, you start to reach different tiers where the money that's brought back to HQ, for lack of a better term, starts to accelerate, right? You get to a threshold where you pass all your fixed operational expenses. And then after that, it's either cost of goods or payroll. And so you're generating the amount of profit you get for every dollar after a certain level starts to increase, right? Like there's this hierarchy or tier. In this instance, I don't know, that threshold's out there somewhere, but I can't see it. I can't figure it out because the payroll has to go up so fast to get the work through the system. It's hard to explain without like bringing up Excel spreadsheets and kind of walking you through each transaction. But it's just not there. Like there's no huge windfall at a certain level because I can't run production. Every car is different. Every customer is different. Every transaction is different. And so really you're trying to make money off of every single one. And it's hard to stay efficient because there are so many potholes you can fall into throughout the workload. Mm-hmm. And that's all stuff I got to work through. And the previous owner didn't have much perspective on that stuff. He doesn't understand the world that I came from, and I don't understand his world. And so there was a little bit of, transitional loss there. Like I would ask him questions from my perspective, like, why do we do this way? Even the transaction at the counter to me seems really laborious. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm from software, like I understand Shopify, and Stripe, and those are all made to make the transaction easy and fast, and it's evolving all the time, and there are apps to go in the system and make it better. And I look at this system, I'm like, man, this is awful, in how long it takes to get through a transaction. Like I get sweaty because I feel like the customer realizes, is this over yet? And just waiting to check them out. and so not having him understand my perspective and me not understanding his perspective, that creates a loss in my ability to upgrade the company, right? Some old business owners, I say old lightly, but some guys that know they're old fashioned, know that they do things the old way, and they're okay with that. And they know that there's efficiency to be gained. I would say that the old owner isn't even conceptually realizing that there's a loss in that system. He just doesn't know any different because he grew up in the business. He doesn't.
And so is that to say that he resisted then your efforts to wring some efficiency out of these processes?
A little bit resistant, I would say, but not for any other reason other than it was just lack of perspective. He just didn't know. Like, it just doesn't understand the perspective. Like what I'm trying to, I might as well be speaking a different language. Like it just gets lost,
And what perspective of his do you lack that you think is an impairment to your being more effective?
He's like, he looks down, everything operationally. Like to me, he'll spend an hour chasing a dollar. And I just cannot wrap my head around that. Part of the reason that this company is so good is because of those things. Like he was anal about everything. And that's hard for me to wrap my head around. I'm a speed guy. That's part of sales and marketing, right? Like I lost $10 in the back end. I better go make 20 on the front. Dangerous perspective from a business owner. I recognize that. I know it's a weakness, and I don't let that like cloud my judgment or how I'm trying to maneuver. So I don't know. Somewhere in the middle, this business should be, can be run properly, right? I'm probably too sloppy, too risky in some of my behavior, where I felt like he was too conservative. So he's choking out the top end, right? And I'm killing it from the top end. Yeah. Like neither side lets the business really, really breathe and perform where it should. Which is why I think we would make a good partnership.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Russ. On the other hand, it's like maybe you need that tension between the back of the house guy and the front of the house guy to come to a happy medium where the business thrives.
Right. And that's what happened in the previous business. Like I'd have some crazy harebrained idea, and then I go talk to my partner. I'm like, hey, I think this is great. Let's go do this. And he was like, come on, man, that's stupid. I was like, what do you mean it's stupid? And we get to have some dialogue, and we get to argue about it a little bit. And then we come to a realization, like, you know what, maybe the concept is good, but the execution would have created XYZ, down the line. I'm like, oh, right. You know what? You're right. Like we missed that one.
Yeah.
At the same token, I would drag him out of his comfort zone. Like, hey, we got to swing on this. And it would, and we'd hit a winner and it'd be good. And so that push pull created this great, progression. And I think that that's what I missed. And I knew that. Like I didn't have that. And I thought I could create a system for that. And I actually grabbed, a couple of different firms to try to help me with, CFO type role, bookkeeping, to sort of account for my weakness in that space. Mm-hmm. But it's just not the same as somebody, sitting over your shoulder saying, hey, should we do that? Mm-hmm. Or, like let's watch the books a little bit tighter. We're losing some money over here. And, all hard lessons.
Well, Russ, let's catch up on the plot. Let's kind of bang through 2023, your first year of ownership, just because I'm watching the clock, and there's a lot still to talk about in terms of your lessons learned and how you're thinking about the future. So you get into the business, and what does the first year look like?
So coming out of the wintertime, I'm still like I'm swimming in like trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Very, very long days. Weekends too, just trying to understand the ins and outs of the business. And granted the owner is still there, for the first 6 months. And so I'll lean on him a lot. I'm trying to watch him and how he's operating and trying to take on those. At the same token, I'm looking at the back end and I'm like, the gross dollars are there. They're climbing. They look good. But payroll is way higher for me than it was for him. And I can't his cost is in there. So if I back that out, then the guy that he hired to replace him, I got to back that out. And my costs are still kind of high, and I'm like, okay, at that point, my only choice, cost of goods looks good. Operational expenses overall, all kind of fall in line to where they were expected at close. So if we back up the clock a little bit after close, so the rent on the primary location doubled. My insurance, like garage liability insurance, van insurance, all that stuff went up 20 or 30% because I was a new entity. The insurance company didn't recognize me. Even though the company had been around a long time, I was a new risk, right? So that went up 20 or 30%. That was a cost I didn't account for. I accounted for interest rates to go up, went up more than we expected. Right. So there's basically all my extra income was erased between owner payroll, new guy, and then rent, insurance, interest. All of my disposable income was gone at that point. So I knew at that moment, like I wasn't going to make any money. So
Russ, can I stop you on an important point? Because it's funny that this hasn't come up, I don't think, in any of my interviews. I must be mistaken on that. The fact that you did this asset purchase, which is the standard way of doing these small business acquisitions, not always, but the standard, meant that your landlord used it as an opportunity to write you a new lease, double your rent. And you just said about the insurance company, you didn't get any of the previous owner's pricing because they are all seeing you, all your vendors, or not all, but some of these important vendors are seeing you as essentially a new customer, a new client of theirs. And they then give you market pricing, which is a lot higher than what your owner had been paying. Anything more to say about, and if you had, but clearly, I mean, to be clear, if you had bought this as a stock purchase, you would have inherited the old pricing, we presume. So, anything more to say about that? Because it's such a powerful point and a powerful weakness to an asset purchase.
Yeah, I could really get on the soapbox about this one because it hurt me so bad. The health insurance changed too, even though I learned more later that made it seem like it shouldn't have changed, but it changed. My L&I rates were different. Like my overall payroll expense changed. I don't know how the state does that, but the L&I rate for that classification changed for me versus what it was for him. I don't know why, because all that stuff had to be rebuilt under my new legal entity. Yeah, with all those costs were unseen until the end. All the insurance, so the national insurance group, I guess. This is a whole thing too. So my number one competitor, I have to communicate with every day because they own the glass servicing side of it. So Safe Light Solutions is, owns Safe Light Autoglass, and they handle all the glass claims for all the insurance companies. Anyway, when our legal entity changed, they dropped us out of the network. So this company had been part of that network for 28 years. And I didn't get paid for 60 days or so. Once they realized that the transaction had taken place, I had to re-register and re-sign up for them. So they would tell every customer that we're not a preferred, vendor of theirs. There's no warranty. So customers would then opt to not do business with us that didn't know any different. We had to fight for the customers we did get. And then we were in this huge pay delay where I didn't get any money. So February to like March, the end of January, February, all of March, basically, I was receiving no insurance income.
And what percentage of the revenue does that represent, roughly?
It's probably half.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your revenue drops by half.
Yeah. The cash flow while I was still doing the work. So I'm still getting insurance work, still doing it, but they're not paying because they're like this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but I think that they do it on purpose to try to choke you out because I'm a small time competitor. The whole Safe Light Solutions doesn't want us to exist. They do everything that they can within legal boundaries or sub-legal boundaries to try to make sure that the little glass shop suffers. And so they were in no hurry to rebuild my profile, even though we met all of the criteria to be certified, and all of the technicians met all of the criteria to be part of that. Like I had submitted it over and over and over, and you get no response back. Or we're working on it. Send us this. We're working on it. Send us on this. And they just drug it out. Like no other system on the planet takes that amount of time. Like literally if I didn't have my own cash at that point to keep the company going, we would have died. They would have killed me before we even really got off the ground. And I think because they just don't care. Sorry, I'm going to get really passionate, heated about that because I think the system is really, really messed up.
And do you think that if you had done a stock purchase, all of that would have been avoided?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. I would have slipped in the back door and they wouldn't have known any different, and the business would have stayed right where it was.
And as you are funding basically this lost revenue out of pocket, are you expecting that the work that you're still delivering is eventually going to be compensated, and you're going to get a big lump payment as it's released, sort of thing? So you are banking on it eventually coming.
Yeah, I knew eventually the money would catch up to me. It just sits out there as long-term, AR. Yeah. And so I was kind of okay with it, but part of it too distorted my vision on the company. I couldn't really get a good perspective on cash flow because I was having to supplement it with my own cash in the beginning. And so for the first, that first quarter in the company, everything is sort of insane at that. Anybody that's gone through an acquisition understands that. You don't know which way is up, right? And then I have this emergency that I'm trying to handle, and then I'm not triaging some of the things I should have been. I should have recognized that payroll was an issue, but I'm worried about getting cash in. I just want to keep the lights on. I'm not worried about anything other than trying to keep I'm 90 days into this thing, and I'm gonna go, I'm gonna lose it all. This is crazy. And so the furthest thing from my mind was, am I operationally sound at that moment? Because I'm just trying to stop the bleeding. Yep. And so what I finally start to catch up. I'm starting to get the checks in, starting to get some money. They finally let us back into the system. And now the customers call to make to make the claim, and they say, oh, this is one of our preferred shops and we'll stand behind the warranty. So we start to get some customer reinforcement through don't get me wrong, the Safe Light Solution still wants to kill me, but they have some legal verbiage that they use to make the transaction for the customer sound better. And so I'm starting to get some cash flow, but I think at that point I'm starting to recognize now we're headed into the summer, which is the busy season. And I'm like, man, payroll is really, really high. I saw a payroll, outbound payroll in the heat of the month, during the busy season, 55 to 60K, in payroll. And I'm way over 100, 100 plus. And I'm like, where is this going? And I'm trying to dissect it because I have one extra person. I have the owner, and I'm picking up some overtime and there's just some stuff I'm not seeing in payroll. And so even though the gross dollars are going up, again, there's no additional profit. Like I'm basically, just surviving, dollar in, dollar out, dollar in, dollar out. I'm like, God, this isn't good. And that's what leads us to the crisis that we're in now. I knew it in June. I knew I was in trouble. I was like, but I have two options. I can either start to tamp down the growth and tamp down what I'm trying to do internally and rewrite the payroll structure, which I was deeply concerned with what that would do with the culture. Like you're the new guy, you come in, you're here for 6 months and now you're starting to either lay people off or change what the money I'm making. And I felt like that could be insurmountable in a company with 10 to 12, 13 people. Yeah. Yep. I didn't want to lose them. Yep. I didn't know the business either, right? Like I can't go out there and change a windshield. I could, now I could, but I couldn't then. And so I'm at the mercy of the people that work with me. Like I true, like servant leadership, we're all aware about it. That is 100% me because I can't do any of it. My job is to make sure that you're happy and that you stay here and you do your job. So I was deathly afraid of that. So my only option at that point was try to grow. So I found there was a small guy that had a small book of business just north of me. So I acquired his book of business. I get a screaming good deal on that. I'm dollar cost averaging through acquisition. So write that one down. So I acquired his book of business and I was able to drop that into our bucket, and that started to give us some additional lift. So 10, 15% growth. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to cover that, but the payroll is still too high. And then, you're not able to crack the code on why, because that is so dramatic. What did you say? It should be around 50, 60 and it's at 100. So it's almost doubled. Yeah, it's almost doubled. So the owner is gone by June, I think. That helps. But I'm still hurting in payroll. And I'm not taking a payroll. Right. And so I know it's not me, and I'm still trying to figure this out. Like I'm looking at past payroll, like who are the employees that were here before? There's been some turnover, so it's not all the same. There were a couple of other deals that were done outside of me, prior to me that I learned about later. I was like, oh, this guy's making way more, but why? I just assumed that obligation, and I don't know what transpired to that. Anyway, like we could go down a whole rabbit hole in that. Okay. But needless to say, that led me, all the way through the summer. And then, so the owner's gone. I kind of figure out what I'm doing now. I still work a lot. I still open and close, dark to dark. But I'm not needed on the weekends. I'm not on my laptop at home, digging through Excel and QuickBooks to figure out what's going on. I have some transparency in numbers now. And then the summer starts to end and we hit October, and then there's this huge fall off in revenue. And I'm like, ooh, that's painful. So overnight, the business starts to really hemorrhage, because my costs, as with typical cash flow ebb and flow, right? Like as your revenue goes up, the cost lag behind it, and as the revenue goes down, the high cost from the previous month is still hitting you, right? It takes some time for those two things to converge. So we just overnight all of a sudden ran into this huge crackdown. Now I've already deployed a fair amount of my own capital to kind of keep the wheels on and buy myself some time. I'm trying to buy myself time. How much did you put in at this point, Russ? I'm give or take. In. Yeah, I would say if you count the October deployment, I'm, 100-ish. 100 as of now, or back then, like 100 as of through October. I think I'd probably deployed 60 plus going into Q4. And then October, I had to do an emergency dump into it to keep it going. And then at that point, like my own personal runway is really scaring me a little bit. And I don't see, I look on the horizon, I'm like, I don't see a way where this company can pay me and stay alive. And so now I'm kind of at this, like, this crisis threshold. I finally, like, went back to the team. You know, I laid a guy off. I didn't replace some that I'd lost through attrition, and I redid the payroll structure. So I have a sales team that's on commission. That's the way it's always been. You know, I believe in commission and, you know, some of that, but that the commission structure was hurting the company. So I finally went back and I told everybody, I was like, listen, I have to fix this, which was brutal. Like the one of the guys that I sent home is a beautiful man, like just a beautiful human, and it was gut-wrenching to send him home. But I had to do it, right? And then I had to have the conversation with, you know, somebody who had become accustomed. He left his previous employer to come work for us for a salary that he thought he was going to get, and I have to cut his pay by 40%. I was like, I just don't have a choice. The company can't support it, right? Like none of those things are discussed when you go through the acquisition, right? This is the drama in this interview. Like nobody tells you about that pain. Like you can go through a termination, you know, at a big corporation as a manager. You're anointed the guy that gets to send somebody home. It's painful, but I'm doing it from a perspective that I acquired this company and I made you a promise that I was going to take care of you, and I'm not upholding my end of the bargain. I just it's painful.
Yeah, it's so much more personal. You're not acting on behalf of the corporation. It's kind of on your shoulders, as you put it. I mean, you've made it kind of an agreement with each of the employees and feel like you're not upholding your end.
Right. Yeah, it's a machine in order to let people pay for their families. Like I get the luxury to lead the machine so that these people can work here and pay for their families, right? Yeah. Like it's not about me ultimately.
Yeah.
And anyway, so, you know, needless to say, we got past that, and we sort of righted the ship from a payroll perspective, you know, and a cost perspective. But the company is still very, very dire in the sense that our revenue is continuing to be, you know, 30% or better below what it was a year ago. And
so even though this is now off season, you're lower than historical off seasons.
Yeah. I'm seeing numbers that this company hasn't seen since 2019. And the you know, the first few weeks of that, I felt like it was me. Like, am I choking the business now? Right? Like, have I eliminated our capacity to generate revenue and the maneuvers that I'm making? Right? Reducing the technician count, reducing the payroll. Like, is everybody's wherewithal to push through and create more revenue? Am I shrinking that? Which is my ultimate fear, right? Like, and from a sales and marketing perspective, that's the last thing I want to do. Like, I want to have this, funnel with tons of capacity in it, and I don't have the capacity that I used to. So I'm like, where's the math and what's the maximum number of dollars I can run through the system? And that's what I'm looking at. Is, did I choke it in that I need, let's say, these are round numbers. This is not factual. Let's say that I need $200,000 to take care of everything, everybody, and spit off some cash, right?
But $200,000 a month in revenue.
Right.
Sales.
Totally a hypothetical number, but let's say that I need 200 to pay for everything.
Yep.
And I've made maneuvers that only allow me to run 175. Like, I all out best operational, capability, and I can only get 175 through the system. Right. I've essentially, like, put a cliff that we're gonna dive off of. So,
that's where things stand right now. That's where things stand right now, Russ.
Yeah, I don't know what that threshold. I mean, I have an idea what that threshold is, but I don't know what if I've limited what we're capable of. I don't know. The volume's not there. The inbound volume's not there. in my opinion. I'm speculating. Right?
And
So
what does the previous owner say about this? Has he ever seen anything like this, or are you even communicating to him about what's going on?
Yeah, we're still communicating. He moved away, and has a regular job now, and so he and I communicate far less. And I've posed this question to him, but he doesn't really have an answer. Like, again, it just sort of like it falls on deaf ears. I'm not faulting him for that, but I would like some input. Like, everybody tells me it's seasonal. Like, I know that there's a low season, but I'm 20 or 30% below. I'm actually getting most of my intel from other local business owners in my space. So I know there's another, autoglass company that's for sale. That's fairly close to me. I was able to get his documentation and look at numbers, real-time numbers, just from a perspective. I mean, he's close enough geographically that I can. The economy is the same, but far enough away that he's not, in my back pocket. Anyway, I was able to get his numbers and look at his real-time numbers and see that he's down. I know that Car Toys, which is a larger competitor in our space, they're down. There's another audio shop, they're down 30%. I'm like, okay, so for whatever reason, there's an economic retraction that's hurting me. I didn't think autoglass would suffer from that. I'm seeing it in the electronics for sure, but I'm also seeing it in autoglass. And my theory as of late, again, I roll through a bunch of different, this could change tomorrow, but I think that because nationwide, there's a big company that closed a bunch of shops and laid off a bunch of technicians, 300 and some technicians back east somewhere. And I think what's happening is that the people are just holding up, right? Like, they're holding on to the cash. And so what happens is that the autoglass industry, the demand starts to shrink a little bit. And then Safelite Solutions, this is like conspiracy that you might have to cut all this out. But I think this Safelite Solutions can turn up the steering in that they start to scoop more work. Like, they get to talk to my customer way before I do. And so if they have open capacity, they get to communicate just a little bit more with the customer to try to bring that customer into their facility, keeping that customer from me. In the summertime, when it's busy, they're full. They don't really have the capacity. They don't want the call center to suck in as much work. And so I think the dialogue or the script that those call centers use changes depending on seasonality. So I think that's what's happening is that Safelite is soaking up more work because the whole market has shrunk a little bit.
Interesting. So your kind of survival is predicated on overflow business from Safelite. But when the whole industry gets this is your theory, but when the whole industry gets tight, Safelite has less overflow and they keep more of it for themselves. And so there's less coming to you at the margins. Mm-hmm. But the final revenue numbers for 2023, how did they compare to previous revenue numbers if you look at the entire year?
We ended up about flat. So up 20%, 20+%. June, probably started the tail end of May. So June, July, August, September was even, maybe 10% better. And then October, we started to see a fall and it was so severe that we erased all the gains that we had in the summer. Mm-hmm. So I ended up finishing the year about flat to what it was the year before. So I'd seen, 20% growth over the whole busy season and then lost it all in Q4. Ended up flat. And so now, and my expenses through that whole summertime are huge. My end P&L for the year is going to be negative 6 digits. Easy. I don't have final numbers yet, but yeah.
And that's after you've put in about 6 digits.
Correct. Yeah.
Russ, going back to the owner and his ability to help you, one thing, just going way back to this general manager sort of person that he was going to hire as his replacement and paid generously. And then now maybe his inability to really help you. Do you think a lot of that stems from the fact that his experience of the business was without a big hefty loan payment? So he just feels like there's more, his experience of the business is one with much more oxygen than you have. I just think that, when we talk about owners and sellers, they don't have their day-to-day reality is so different than ours because they don't have this big SBA payment that all of us have. Do you think that plays a role in your kind of talking past each other?
Yeah. I mean, I showed him before we closed the deal in the months heading into it. There was a couple of times where I was, I had this like my projection tool, my Excel projection tool, and he could see in that projection tool, here's the SBA debt load. Like I was giving him full transparency on everything that I was taking over.
Yeah.
And again, like it's just, I don't know if he chooses not to say anything and has a thought, or if he just doesn't have a thought. I just don't know, because I had some questions and I exposed that to him, and we've had questions later. I was like, listen, the salary that you used to pay yourself basically is now SBA debt. Those two things were interchanged. That's part of it. What made me comfortable. It was like, he's been paying himself this salary for a couple of years. It was like, so the company can support it comfortably.
Gotcha.
The SBA debt. And so but not once did he acknowledge, in September of whatever, I took this in financial due diligence. I may have uncovered it, like where he changed that. I didn't see it, but where he took less to keep the company going. I just couldn't find it. But it's hypothetical. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't know why I didn't get any, like why he doesn't, like maybe you could do this, or what about trying this, or what about that? It's just not.
Speaking of trying things and things that he wouldn't relate to, again, on the SBA loan, talk to us about this, what you've done with your loan.
So I knew that there's a risk. There's a financial risk. I'm at a point where, I could, not have enough cash to keep the company alive, or the company could shrink fast enough where I can't make the obligations. And so I thought it might be prudent for me to reach out to my SBA lender and say, hey, I haven't missed any payments. I haven't been late. But maybe we need to have some dialogue. And God bless him, the SBA lender was immediately sent me to his team, and they were like, let's see if we can, do a modification, or do, interest only payments or whatever. Like he gave a list of things that were plausible. And I was like, well, that was a huge relief to me. I don't want to marry myself to an SBA loan for 2 decades.
Tell us what the restructuring was, if you can.
Well, so it's not complete yet. So I went through the paperwork gauntlet, 2 weeks ago. And so it's within underwriting review. I just got an email this morning actually asking for some additional information. They need some more to clarify the final 2023 numbers. So I don't know what they're going to do. But it looked to me like their initial thought was a modification, extend the term, 20 years versus 10 years, which would take a huge load off of the company, and could, conceivably create the breathing room I need. I mean, we're still, in dire straits, but I feel like the decline is leveled out. Mm-hmm. So if I play the decline out, I'm going to be 20 to 30% down for the rest of the year. But I'm still going to have a busy summer. It'll just be 20% less than last summer. Mm-hmm. And those are numbers that I can just rebuild my projections and work back off of what I think that will be. And so I put in the new SBA payment. I'm making a bunch of other shifts too, to try to help and get through it.
And so let's pick apart some of that. So the SBA lender offered to re-amortize the loan over a 20-year term rather than the 10, which is what it was. And that, of course, reduces the payment a lot. Can you say how much? Or I'm not sure that'll be helpful to the audience, but maybe just give us a number anyway.
Yeah, it's so it could be, it's going to be around $80,000 a year.
$80,000 a year that frees up. Okay. Of course, it does then make, as you said, the loan a 20-year loan. So you'll be paying it off for 20 years if you don't refinance at some point in the future. Is there any other negatives to it? Because that does seem like a pretty good deal for just raising your hand.
Yeah, I don't know that there are any other like gotchas in that. Right. I don't know like what happens if it gets worse. What if next October comes around and I'm still in a predicament? Do I have any more lifelines? Like this is the one lifeline I get, do I use it now? I would say that those are questions that I have in the back of my mind, but there's nothing else that has come out of the woodwork that looks negative. I think we all recognize that the bank doesn't want to repossess a home. Like they're not out to do that. Nobody wins in that. I guess in my instance where I've got enough equity to cover it, they might be okay with it, but then they make me homeless. And then, having an owner, like from a bank's, I'm just trying to put myself in their position from a bank's perspective. If the owner, has lost everything, like how can you ensure that your debt is going to continue to get paid?
Right.
Like if you take everything from me and I have nothing to live for, from a bank's perspective, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
Right. Maybe they're maybe they're bloodthirsty. I don't know, but
no, it's definitely an important insight into their psychology that they don't want to repossess anything. They want to see their borrowers be successful, and so they give themselves wiggle room on the back end that they might not be so transparent about up front. I'm getting a little above my pay grade and talking too much about that because I don't know what quivers there are what arrows there are in the quiver. But when you talk to your lender, did you get the feeling that you could have an even more open conversation than you had, where it's like, okay, thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Lender, for changing the amortization, the term here. What happens if things keep going the wrong way? What are step 2, 3, and 4? Do you have any visibility into that?
Nothing was exposed, but the fact that I was immediately sent to a team that's built around dealing with this makes me feel like there's a triage system in place. Yeah. And I imagine that there's probably a tiered sure. Perspective. I don't know, had a SBA payment bounce. Like I assume there's some sort of deployment. Like they have a probably an SOP for when that happens, right? Yep. Like this team probably comes converging in on you, and then you start this dialogue process. Yep. I think I'm ahead of it, so I'm not seeing everything. Those are all assumptions.
Yeah. And so, Russ, with this, some debt relief, it's not relief, but this debt extension, which relieves the monthly payment. And let's say that your numbers are now down 20-ish%, your sales are now down 20-ish%. I hear you say that, playing that forward for the remainder of this year, if they remain down 20% all the way for all 12 months, that with this relief of the debt payment, you can make the numbers work. The business can be sustainable.
Yeah, I believe so. Back, when I restructured the payroll, I also went back to my insurance company and changed deductibles and changed coverages and stuff. The bank has some say in that. I have limits in which I can maneuver stuff. But yeah, I changed that. I changed the health insurance plan, which really I'm too small for health insurance. I mean, it was a cool perk by the previous owner. I shouldn't have it at all, to be honest. So I changed the percent in which the company pays, and I changed the sick time policy. Like I've made a ton of lever pulls. I now charge a customer 3% if they're going to use their credit card. All these little things to change the revenue perspective, and the net profit perspective. Like I'm changing all of that currently in addition to the debt. I'm also, I'm trying to consolidate locations. Like I need to get everybody under one roof. So I can't retract anymore right now because I'm so spread out. So I need to get into a central location. Like this is a whole nother story here, but this is actively happening right now. Is if I can get everybody into one roof, if I need to retract and lay additional employees off, I can still be efficient in one building. With 2 buildings, trying to keep coverage in 2 buildings, technicians in 2 buildings, I'm at a retraction limit unless I start to limit hours. And then from a customer perspective, I think that looks bad. You're only open, 9 to 4, or you're only open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The impression that gives to the customer, I don't think is very good. It's just too hard to control, operationally, the number of locations that I have when I need to retract.
And if you consolidate, do you think that this will set a new foundation from which you can survive comfortably, or is it also kind of a Hail Mary?
It's a little bit of a Hail Mary. I'm pushing my eggs into what there's some stuff you and I can't talk about it right now, but at the next call we'll be able to have a discussion. There's another layer in this consolidation that I can't speak to right now. But yeah, there's a side of this where I'm making one final like push to try to keep everything alive. And here's the other side of that. If I can get everything into one unit, I have a guy that's capable of being a general manager and two sales members. Everybody's dispersed across the facilities right now. So it's basically everybody's like, I'm covering a facility. I've got another guy at another facility, and then I've got two guys at another facility. If I can put everybody in that one roof, I don't have to be there open to close, and I can go get a job. So that, which I'm going to have, like I keep deploying my runway. I got bills to pay too, and I don't want to kill the company because I need to eat. Like if the company can pay for itself, and I can run at 30,000 feet and just let it idle, I'm good with that. But I got to go out and find a job. I can't do that if I need to be here open to close. So that's another advantage. If I can get into one seat, I can go out and seek, outside employment to at least keep the lights on. That from a searcher perspective. So I looked at that business. Say, okay, can you jump into the system if all hell breaks loose? Can you jump in and do everything? Right. And I thought, like in landscape, I can go pick up a shovel. We talked to the gentleman that owns the cemetery. He was able to jump into the system and go do some of that and pick up. I don't have the skill set. Now I could be a salesperson, but a salesperson doesn't make enough to pay my bills. So for me to get rid of a salesperson and take that seat, it still creates a net negative situation for me. So, there's the one position that could pay me enough. I don't bring enough value to the company to have that person leave the company, right? Mm-hmm. Like his contribution is so high and so good for the company that it would be, again, a net negative for the company. So I need to, potentially go out and seek outside employment, but I can't do that until I get into one building.
Russ, you just teased the fact that we have already planned to reconvene to hear how all of this is played out, because we're talking now and it is so in flux. And a lot of your prescriptions for how to solve this dilemma, you're literally putting in place. Like as we just heard, you had a request from your SBA lender in your inbox this very morning. So we are going to talk again and hear how things have shaped up here. For now, is there anything more that the audience should hear, should know? Anything I failed to ask?
I not that I can think of. But yeah, the next 6 weeks will be telling. There'll be a lot of developments, both from the SBA side. Do we survive the winter? So the busy season starts to ramp up in March. So we're in January right now. I got to get through January. I got to get through February, and then I should start seeing lift in March. I'll know in 6 weeks about the one facility idea, and I'll be able to map that out and explain what the other side of that I can't speak of yet. I can talk about that, so it'll be a good recap. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Russ. Well, of course, thank you so much for giving us a window into what this looks like real time. And I'm sure every single person listening to this is really rooting for you. Sounds like a very difficult situation, but that you are doing your damnedest to pull through. So we'll hold our breath in the meantime and talk to you again when you think it's appropriate. Of course, you and I will be in touch.
I look forward to it, Will. I look forward to it. More than you know.
Thank you, Russ. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.